Hi, Tony from All the Remote Things back today. If you're watching this, don't forget, like, subscribe, and join our Remote AF community on remoteaf.co. Click the community button. Really like you to do that so we can keep this thing going. And don't forget, we have many guests that are coming along. One of those fantastic ones today, James Shaw. How are you today, James?
I'm doing wonderful. Good to meet you.
Yeah, brilliant. Uh, James, it might be lovely for everyone. I had the pleasure of meeting and chatting with you. Of course, I've read your books as well, but we were on the same speaking ticket. I think you and I worked it out. It was about 10 years ago that we actually we did so.
Yeah.
But let people know who you are.
Well, I'm James Shore. I am an extreme programming aficionado. I've been doing Agile since 1999. Got involved with a method called feature-driven development, which was by Peter Code. And in that first project where I was using feature-driven development, one of the team members came to me and said, "Let's try this thing called extreme programming." And I said, "Extreme what?" what a silly name. And he said, "Well, they're talking about it on the wiki web." And I said, "The wiki what?" And I said, "Yeah, Ward Cunningham has this thing called the wiki web. It's on c2.com. You should check it out. There's all these great conversations." And I said, "Well, that sounds silly." But I checked it out, and there's some really interesting ideas. And I thought, this is terrible. It's never going to work. This pair programming, this emergent design, all this stuff, terrible ideas. I have to try it and see what happens. And I tried it, and it worked really well. And I thought, wow, okay, let's do this some more. And so I got involved with a team, tried it on a project. It worked out reasonably well. That company asked me to help their team do a new project. And I said, let's do extreme programming with there. Had a great success, and then was spoiled. Wasn't willing to work in any other way ever again. But nobody in 2000 was using extreme programming. So I had to become a consultant and a trainer. But to this day, I'm really a practitioner. And what I do is I work with companies as a practitioner to help them do great work. That's what I'm passionate about.
Brilliant. You can see I'm smiling from ear to ear because what you're saying just resonates with me because in 1999, myself and three others were known, Craig Smith and Renee Trout, and we were all thrown into a room with a bunch of people for this experimental process called extreme programming. We literally had the white book, I think it was Kent Beck's book. We were sort of,
Mm-hmm.
and we had references to Ward Cunningham, and so we were just following it like, is this thing going to work? And again, exactly as you said, we were just spoiled, and you never wanted to work in any other way after that. The interesting thing is you also mentioned extreme programming, and I say to a lot of people, even today, that the things that extreme programming brought to the table and the things that I learned extreme programming, they're more poignant and more needed today than they ever were, James.
Yeah, that's so true. Extreme programming was the first really big breakout success for Agile. Extreme Agile came after extreme programming success. The Agile name did, and then in the mid 2000s, it sort of fell by the wayside. I think partly because Kent Beck, I think, had some personal issues. He stopped promoting it, and it's hard. Hard to it takes some practice. It takes some work, and it's not something you can learn in 2 days. And so I think what happened was people started doing the easy parts of Agile, the 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 stuff that you could get certified for, and not saying that things like Scrum are bad, but they're incomplete. They don't have all the technical practices, um, and unfortunately, I think the technical side of Agile from extreme programming sort of fell by the wayside.
Yeah.
But that's the vegetables. That's what gives you the ability to have your dessert of being able to change direction any time. If you don't do the technical work to make it possible to change direction, then you're going to really struggle with the other ideas of Agile.
Yes. That's it. I agree with you, and that's a great segue into that mid 2000 piece because there was a book that was handed to me, which was called The Art of Agile Development.
Mm.
I think we were just chatting. I think it was about 27 or 28. I got my hands on it, which would have been around when it was released. And the thing that resonated with me with that book was, well, all of those practices and all those things that you think about and how it interconnects with Agile, the book sort of drew those threads. And for those who do not know, James is the author of that particular book.
Yeah. And it is now actually available in a second edition. It's just I've just come out. Well, last year it came out with a second edition. This is a total, almost a total rewrite. In fact, I probably shouldn't have called it a second edition because I went through every page and updated it with sort of the modern agile practice with things like continuous deployment and DevOps and some of the sort of more modern ways of thinking about planning that you see with Jeff Patton's story mapping and so forth, as well as a lot more stuff about how do we actually put this into practice, because I'm sure you've seen this as well. That is where the rub is, right? It can be really hard to put this stuff into practice, and take some real effort and cultural change.
And I think the thing about it is this, and I'm not dissing DevOps in any shape or form, because it's a required thing. But a lot of people talk to the fact that we're going to do DevOps, so we've got the DevOps frame. But actually, the XP practices and the development practices that are contained, and particularly you described them well in the first edition, second edition, you really have brought them to tying the bow, right, where they sit together. Is that people flow into this DevOps, but they don't have that stuff, as you said, and the reason being is because it's not easy, or they don't quite know how to put it in place. And I'm sure you're seeing that as well.
Yeah, well, I think because extreme programming, these technical foundations of Agile, and not just technical, like when people say stories and story points, this all comes from extreme programming. Scrum doesn't have stories or story points or velocity. Not that velocity has been really misused now, but a lot of the foundational ideas of what people think of Agile come from extreme programming. I think extreme programming did fall by the wayside. It's been mostly forgotten. Mostly, I think people think of it and they think, a continuous or a pair programming is like the one thing that people remember from extreme programming, not realizing that test-driven development and continuous integration and many other practices also come from that. But what you have is, I think, is some of the ideas of XP are being reinvented sort of piecemeal.
Yeah.
And then being misused. Like what you see in the DevOps world is you've got the core DevOps community, which sort of comes more from an ops perspective, but is really embracing a lot of the ideas that extreme programming brought in. But then you have folks who are saying, well, let's make a DevOps team, because people hear these words, they hear Agile, they hear DevOps, and they say, well, I really want that, but they don't understand it. and they create this sort of, well, I use the phrase cargo cult. They create this made up version, and then they spread that, and it often turns out to be, well, frankly, rather horrible.
Yeah, it's I hear that all the time. We've got a DevOps team, or we're going to have a DevOps team, and I say, no, you've got a bottleneck.
Yeah.
That's
And of course, proper DevOps is devs and ops working closely together. Agile is about creating cross-functional teams, eliminating these bottlenecks, creating good communication, bringing in a lot of different perspectives so we can focus on delivering value to our business. If you are creating a DevOps team, you've missed the entire point.
That's and we do see that a lot. Or the other thing that we see, I think, in terms of it, you mentioned it just before. It's a bit of what I call the pick and the choose agility, right? So they pick to do the easy things out of that suite, and then they choose not to do the things that actually get the value, right? So you always hear, well, we're going to do CI/CD and whatever it be, right? But then when you actually delve into it, they haven't really gone into the practices that actually enable that. They've just put in some mechanisms, or maybe the actual tools. That's the other thing you hear is that, oh, I've got a DevOps tool, that'll fix it.
Everybody loves tools. Tools are the magic bullet. This is a point I make really firmly in the book, which is if you're going to try to be agile, because it is not something that you can buy. It's not a tool you can use. It's a way of approaching the world. It's a way of approaching the business. If you're going to try to be agile, then what's going to hold you back is the constraints that you are under. And really becoming agile is about changing your constraints. And for a lot, and that's hard. It requires a lot of political capital. And if you if you don't change your constraints, but you try to adopt the practices of Agile, then you're going to really struggle. But if you change your constraints and you approach things in an adaptive rather than predictive way, if you approach things in a people-centric rather than process-centric way, then you're going to see some real benefits, even if you don't adopt the Agile practices. The reason I wrote the first edition of the book, and particularly the reason I wrote the second edition of the book, was I wanted to show people how those constraints could be changed and what the world could look like when they really did it well. So ultimately, this book is really a how-to guide. It's a how do you put this into actual practice, and then once you've put it into practice, how can you experiment with it to make it better? But what are the things that you really, really do have to do to be successful, and what do you need to convince people to try before you can be successful?
What I like what you've done as well with that is, and having read the book, it is a real how-to guide. It does give you that step by step, but even you've gone one step further, which I quite liked, and we were chatting about that off air as well. Is that you took that and you created an Art of Agile Development book club.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And a lot of those clips that are now out on I believe it's on your website, but
Mm-hmm.
where you can actually go in and watch those, and it discusses each chapter of the book, and you had a number of different people. You want to talk about that just for a minute?
Yeah. So if anybody's interested, they can find it on my website. It's jamesshore.com/s/AOAD2 book club is the short link. It will take you there. And what it is I went through every practice in the book. So pair programming and continuous integration and visual planning and every single practice. I held a book club for about 45 minutes every week where people would get together and we do sort of like a call-in talk show, and we'd discuss, I'd read an excerpt and we discuss the practices in the book. But I was able to get a lot of guests in. I had Kelsey Hightower, I had Jessica Kerr, I had Kent Beck, Martin Fowler, talking it up. Like I had Kent talking. What did I have Kent talking about? I think it wasn't test-driven development. Oh, I had him talking about evolutionary design, which I think is one of the most important topics in Agile, is being able to incrementally modify your software as your needs change. So how do you do that? Well, evolutionary design is the technical underpinnings of that. So just a fantastic set of guests and a really interesting set of topics and lots of audience participation. So yeah, I'm really happy with how that turned out.
Yeah, and I think it's a brilliant way to absorb it. So you can sort of read the book, and then you can listen to some of those, and you can actually you can follow along with the book in terms of what you're talking with each episode, which is a brilliant way to take that for people. Um, we're talking about agility and agility into organizations. And the other thing that you've been invested in, and we've had Diana Larson on the show previously. And so what I was saying to you previously, I've got the bookends of Agile Fluency.
Mm-hmm.
So Agile Fluency is something I want to touch on. And we've talked about where Agile Fluency came from, etc. But what I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about in the Agile Fluency is how you're seeing that being used in organizations. Because you just talked about it's hard to adopt agility.
Mm-hmm.
And Agile Fluency is a great mechanism to have those conversations and to identify how you can get there. How are you seeing it used in different organizations in different ways?
Yeah. Well, so of course, Diana and I created the Agile Fluency Model a while ago now, and it actually ended up being the foundation of the structure for this book. So the Agile Fluency Model is, very briefly, because I'm sure Diana talked about this, it has multiple zones. And the idea with the fluency model is you can be fluent in any or multiple zones at once. There's focusing, delivering, optimizing. And so each part of the book is about one of these zones and how do you become fluent in that zone. And the Agile Fluency model is a way of describing what Diana and I have seen and practice in organizations. But what you can do is you can look at it and say, well, this is where we want our organization to go, and this will help us understand how to get there. And earlier I was talking about constraints. The Agile Fluency model really is saying, if you want to be fluent here, you need to make these investments. And if you do, you will see these benefits. Or you can look at it and say, these are the benefits we're seeing, and thus we are fluent here, and that tells us where we want to go next. I found it really useful when I talk to people in organizations. I work as a consultant. People come to me and say that we want to be more agile. I say, well, what does that mean to you? And which is kind of an important question because it means very different things to different people. And more importantly, what are you willing to invest to do that? I'm not talking about paying me money. I'm talking about what are you willing to invest in your organizational capability? What kind of constraints are you willing to change? And that's, I think, where the Agile Fluency Model really shines, because you can say, well, I want to see these outcomes from, say, the focusing zone. I want to be able to have the ability to change direction. I want to have my team, a team that works well together. I want a team that's constantly improving their ability to work, and they're focusing on delivering value to our organization. It's like, great, I'm glad you want that. What you need then is you need to invest in creating an environment where you can have a team of people who own their work and are responsible for deciding for themselves how the work gets done and can adapt their plans as they go. Are you willing to make those investments? And the degree to which people answer those, that's the conversations that we have. We want this. This is what it takes. Oh, well, we don't think we can do that. So let's do this instead. And so we decide, well, which of these zones do we want to go for? And then that leads to which practices can we use and invest in learning to get there.
It's interesting. I talked a little bit today, but I'll talk a little bit deeper with you in it. Myself and another gentleman, Phil Kaczynski, we have this guide that we created, which was really a agility guide. And we used the Heart of Agile as the premise of the zones, if you like, Alistair's version of it. But the fluency model, we use the fluency model to have those conversations that you're actually talking about as to where, and we've had some good results with that. And you'll notice I didn't use the word maturity assessment in there, and I love that fluency doesn't use the word in there either, because I think maturity assessment is just, the word maturity upsets me whenever I hear that. So for anyone watching this, don't use that, because it's not up to us to be able to tell that team that they're more mature than that team and that person. Agile fluency gives you a different mechanism to have that conversation. Your thoughts on that, James?
Well, I think there's a very important distinction between fluency and maturity. Maturity says that you have a path to follow that goes from childishness to, mature adult. Whereas, and I think there is a degree of maturity for each individual fluency zone, in that in the beginning you were learning, you may choose not to be fluent in a zone. Then you may be learning to be fluent, and then you can be fluent with somebody's help, and then you can be fluent as long as a certain person on the team is there, and then you can be fluent when anybody on the team is there. That's sort of a maturity progression within each zone. But the important thing about the fluency model is that each zone truly stands alone. You don't have to go through them in any order. In any particular order. There is an order that tends to happen, but you don't have to go through it in any order. What you want to do is you want to say, it's really an investment guide. This is what we want to accomplish. This is what it's going to take to get there. And there are multiple things you can choose to want to accomplish or not. For example, optimizing is sort of really, the optimizing zone is kind of the promise of Agile. It's this idea that we are going to change direction in response to changing market conditions. We're going to optimize the results for our business. Everybody wants that. But to get that, you have to really invest in an autonomous team that has business expertise on the team to make those decisions and give them total authority over their budgets and plans. And now all of a sudden, not everybody wants that. So that's the decision, here's the benefits, here's the investments. You've got multiple zones to choose from. Choose the ones that are right for you. And as much as I would love, everybody to invest in focusing and delivering and optimizing, I don't think that's realistic for a lot of organizations. But there's also a cost for not investing these things, because if you don't do it, then you're not going to get what you need. And for example, if you don't invest in this delivering zone, it takes a lot of technical skills to get fluent in the delivering zone. But if you don't invest in that, then you might find that your software is not sustainable. Like it tends to start to run into what people call technical debt, with an eye roll and a grimace. So yeah. I think as a discussion to have with executives about what are the trade-offs they are making, either consciously or unconsciously, it's a very powerful tool.
Yeah, I think that the power of it is that you actually open those conversations at each of the layers, the executive layer, the team layer. It shines a light, if you like, that says, here's somewhere you probably need to start thinking about, and here's the incremental effects if you don't, which I think is different to many other models that are available. I know that you've developed something to help people absorb how this all works, which is the Agile Fluency Game. So gamifying things is always something I'm really interested in, and of course, you wanted to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the Agile Fluency Game, I've actually got a box of it right here.
There's one we prepared earlier, people.
Yeah. The Agile Fluency Game is a game that was produced by Arlo Belshi and myself, and it was based on the first edition of The Art of Agile Development, which of course was based on a lot of my experiences, and also those same experiences are what led to the Agile Fluency Model. So, ultimately, when Arlo Velshi and I created the game, we didn't give it a name, but it corresponds so closely to the Agile Fluency Model that I ended up taking it and tweaking it just a little bit to fit with the model, and so it reflects a journey that a team can take. I'm very proud of this game, so I'm going to gush about it for a moment, if you don't mind.
Absolutely.
What it is it is a simulation. And actually, I've gotten a lot of comments from people saying, wow, this is an incredibly realistic simulation. It's a simulation of 2.5 years of a new team adopting or not adopting Agile ideas. And over the course of those 2.5 years, which is 10 rounds, so one season per round, you're going to take your team of 3 programmers, 2 testers, and 1 project manager, because this is a team coming in that's never done anything Agile. So you've got this sort of typical team structure. And they're going to spend their time each quarter delivering features and learning Agile practices. And of course, you only get points for delivering features. But every feature has a cost, which is the time it takes to do it and the cost it takes to maintain it. And so if you do nothing but deliver features, what you're going to find, this is a little bit of a spoiler, what you're going to find is that you run out of the ability to deliver new features about halfway through the game. And you're spending all your time doing maintenance. And this is where the programmers that play the game say, so this is so real, because you get into this really uncomfortable situation where you're just running as fast as you can to stay in the same place. I play the game. We teach, so we use the game. We teach people how to facilitate the game, and they can get their own copies. And in fact, in Germany, for your viewers in Germany, there is a game facilitators workshop coming up soon. And of course, Diana and I both give workshops using the game as well. If anybody's interested, you can find all of that at agilefluency.org on the workshops tab. So I give this workshop usually with mixed groups. I try to get, team members and executives in the room at the same time. And it's this fantastic experience because almost always the executives are like, put full speed ahead on the highest value features, put everything in, and then round 3, they're out of money. They just, they're out of the game, they lose. Sometimes they're a little bit unhappy about it. And then at the end of the session, we have a debrief because, of course, any experience you need to debrief it. And they say to the programmers in the room and the testers and the other sort of in the trenches people, is this real? And they're like, and everybody else says, yes, this is really real. This happens. If we don't invest in our capacity and our capability, we get to the point where we cannot continue to deliver. And you know how it takes sometimes for 2 months for us to do the trivial thing of changing the font on a web page, or or adding this little thing that you thought should be easy. Well, it's because we didn't invest our capacity. So it's a really valuable and powerful learning tool. And we've got some neat stuff in there, like a test-driven development is one of the practices that you can learn. And I wonder if I have it here. And we have things like continuous deployment, which we called release at will in the game, and refactoring. So, but there's things like this that get more expensive over time. That's the little ball and chain there. Like if the longer you wait to invest in refactoring, the more it costs. So it gets more and more expensive every feature you deliver. But you can also only learn it by putting it into practice. So you can't invest any more in this than you invest into features. And so it creates this neat little uh, synergy. That's a very consultancy word. It creates this neat little interplay um, between the rules of the game that end up simulating what happens in real world projects really well and how they fail really well, which is such a powerful learning experience for folks.
And I think the fact that you play it with the leadership layer,
Mm-hmm.
people who do it, because those things like refactoring, as you were just talking about, they don't really get that. And when you can show that in cost and what it does to your actual ability to deliver to the demand, that's a very powerful thing that brings them to the table.
Well, it comes back to where we started at the beginning of the conversation, which is that Agile is fundamentally a philosophy of working, but it is enabled by excellence, by both business excellence in terms of understanding what your customers want and how to meet those needs, and technical excellence so that you can deliver according to those needs. And if you don't have the underlying excellence, if you don't have the practices, I am all in favor of understanding the philosophy, but if you do not have the ability to execute, you will fail. And I think there are far too many organizations paying lip service to the word agile, not changing their constraints, not investing in really getting operational excellence, and having very substandard results.
Yeah, and then of course, who gets blamed for it? Well, either the Agile gets blamed for it, right? And they say Agile
Yeah.
doesn't for our organization, where the reality of it is, it's because you've done the pick and choose that we just talked about at the beginning of the show
Yeah.
as well, right? I'm going to sort of, it's related to this. So I'm just going to move to the right a little bit, as I say, and it's you you work a lot with a particular scaling, where you talk a lot about a particular scaling, which is fast scaling. And I'm
Mm.
very interested because I can see the facets of what we've been talking about today are encompassed within fast scaling. So let me just preface this. I'm not bashing any of the other scaling mechanisms, but I do feel that they are lacking certain things. I'm very interested in fast scaling so that people can hear about it, so they have another option, James.
Yeah. So fluid scaling technology, or FAST, is something created by Ron Cortell. And when I first heard about it, I had the same reaction to it that I had to extreme programming, which is this is wacky and weird and can't possibly work. I have to try it, because there's some really interesting ideas here. It is the simplest approach to scaling you have ever seen. There is a certain scaling approach that shall not be named, which you go to the website and you look and you see this massive picture with stuff everywhere. And there's jokes about where's the customer? Like, oh, there it is, way down there in the corner.
It's unreal.
Um,
As
but
Dave Snowden rightly calls it, the ball.
yeah, yeah. So unlike those other scaling approaches, um, fast is really simple, but it's extremely agile. At its core, what it is it is a way of having a large number of people work together to self-organize around the work. And of course, this is what we've always wanted in Agile, is self-organizing teams. But how do you do it when you have 20, 30, 40, 60 people on a team? Well, the Agile community has also embraced something called open space technology, which is an approach to conferences. Open space is a self-organized conference. If you've never been to one, try to find the opportunity. Here in the West Coast of the US, there's the Agile Open Northwest, which is fantastic, although it's online this year. And I don't know if the online experience will be the same as the in-person experience. I've yet to go to an online open space, so we'll see how that goes. But what the way open space works is people submit their ideas for a conference talk, and it all gets arranged on a wall, and then um, people go to the sessions that they want to go to, and it creates this wonderful organic rich conference. So as fast is oriented partly around open space, and then the other aspect of fast is team self-selection, which of course is something else you see in open space. Team self-selection says we're going to define our teams, and we're going to say what each team needs, and then people are going to decide for themselves which team they joined. So I'd used open space. I'd been to open space conferences. I saw how rich and wonderful those conferences could be. And I use open space, or I use team self-selection myself as part of the organizational transformation work I do. It makes people nervous, but it's led to these just wonderful results where teams are excited to work together and hit the ground. There's another consultantism for you, but they hit the ground running. They're ready to work together, right? They're excited to work together. So I thought, well, let's see what happens when you put these together the way Ron has, and how well does it work? And let's do it in a remote environment, because my experience with this was in the midst of the pandemic, when with a company that was entirely remote. And it was beautiful. 2 weeks after we started, people had it down. Every 2 days, we were defining what work with this group of, I think it was 40 people. What this, or maybe it was 30. I don't remember now. I've got notes on it, but I don't have them in front of me. Every 2 days, we were deciding what this group of 30 people were going to do, and people were self-organizing in teams to do that work. Mostly they were staying in the same teams, but as the needs of the organization changed, people would move into new teams. And it sounds like a lot of overhead, but this took 15 to 20 minutes. That was the entire overhead of the fast structure. Um, it was We adopted it because we wanted to give people the opportunity to learn from each other, and we had an environment where there was a lot of change and a lot of needs to react to change, and it solved both of those problems beautifully. Uh, I've only done it the once at this point, but I've had enough experience with Fast now that I absolutely would recommend it as an experiment for people who want to try something new. And and I see how it can solve a lot of the problems that I see in scaling. I've been working with organizations on scaling work for years now, and one of the problems that organizations have is, how do you create cross-functional teams when they're only 5 to 7 people? How do we get an ops person and a business expert and a user experience person and actual programmers all on the same team, and have enough of these people to go around? Well, you can't. But if you've got a virtual team of 40 people, now you can and you can have those people with fast going to the right places at the right time. It's quite brilliant. It's definitely something I recommend. If you go to my website, uh, you'll see some of my videos on it, and where I talk about the experience.
The question I probably have with it, because I have watched those and listened to you talk about it before, is it strikes me that if you're going to take that as a thing, once you've experimented with it, if you decide you're going to move towards that, because experimenting is okay and you can do that, but you probably then need to actually, because I always talk about, whenever you do any kind of scaling, you end up with a 3-speed economy if you're not careful. Right? People always touch the transitional flow of work and the teaming of work, but they don't touch the funding and the governing of the work. And it strikes me that if you are going to invest in that, then you really need to start thinking about how you look at your adaptive portfolio and how you look at the adaptive funding to that. Your thoughts on that, James?
Well, I think Agile in general, from a funding perspective, works with a business as usual funding. So you've got a team of people that costs a certain amount of money per year, and that is your costs. They cost, if we're going to put 20 people on this, then it costs what 20 people cost. And it's not so much about, the project oriented mindset says we are going to build this thing and it's going to cost this much, and at the end we're going to get this result. That's not really how software works. You don't deliver something and then walk away. It has to be maintained for as long as it's alive, and you're going to want to continue to add features to it. So in both normal agile development and in fast, and that this is the way the organization I worked with did it, they used a business as usual funding model. So they just said, these are our ongoing costs. And the important thing to look at, I think, is, well, what value are we getting for that cost? What is our return on investment? And let's track that return on investment and make sure that we are getting appropriate results. And when we're not, let's change our plans. The project oriented mindset says we're going to track our costs. And if they don't match up to our predictions, then we are going to beat people. But a product oriented mindset says we're going to track our value. And when we don't get the value we expect, we are going to change our plans, which is very different than we're going to whip people until we're back on schedule.
Yeah, whip them or make them work extra hours or try and throw more people at it. And we all know that doesn't work either. So,
It
no,
doesn't work. And it doesn't necessarily, even if you get back on plan, these predefined plans do not reflect the reality on the ground that is discovered as you do the work.
yeah. And often it's, I talk about the fact that it's, it's all green and then it goes, the watermelon drops and it's code red, but the piece that comes out is what I call code brown. And that's where
Mm.
the proverbial has hit the fan and everybody has to run around and deal with what's left over.
Yeah, in those environments where everything is focused on, are we on schedule? Are we meeting our cost projections? They encourage that sort of failure because you're incented to not be the first person to blink. So I call it schedule chicken. Everybody runs towards each other as fast as they can, or towards the edge of the cliff, and they're hoping that somebody else will hit the brakes first, so that they can say, "Oh, well, we were on schedule. Well, we're going to slow down now because though Bob is behind schedule. Bob, shame, Bob. Yeah. If you're looking at value, I mean, you know, politics are politics, and there will always, as much as I would like to have blame-free organizations, there will always be people pointing fingers and so forth. But if we can at least focus on what are we doing to change our understanding of how to achieve value rather than how to flog people to get back on what was probably not a very good plan to begin with, um, that would be a step forward. And then, of course, if we could truly be focused on a blameless organization where we understand that things happen for systemic reasons rather than individual behaviors, that would be even better. But I'm going to be a little more less idealistic, a little more realistic than that. I'll take what I can get.
I'm going to steal that, the schedule chicken. I love that. Brilliant. Look, we're really close to the end of our time, and I wish I had more time to talk to in depth of some of these things. If people want to get in touch with you, James, if they want to get involved in any of these things, how can they touch base with you?
Best way to get in touch with me is via my website, which is jamesshore.com. If you're interested in my latest writings, there is a new link on there that you can go to. I also have events that are happen frequently. I would love to talk to people about FAST and how they can scale in their organizations. I'm very excited about this technique, and I want to see it. I've had enough experience now to know that it is something that's absolutely worth investigating, and I want to see more people trying it. So get in touch with me about that. And I also love talking about the technical underpinnings, that operational excellence, and stuff that makes Agile really work.
Brilliant. Look, wonderful to have you on all the remote things. For you that are watching this, don't forget, like, subscribe, join our Remote AF community at remoteaf.co. Click the community button. You'll find a whole bunch of people there that are invested in the remote community and all these types of things that we're talking about today. James Shaw, it's been fantastic to have you on all the remote things today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.